country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This is the we we the nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we the nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriot to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we the nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This is the we the fear. Alex, nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This is the we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This is the we the nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we the nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriot to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we the nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the village city area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation.
Greetings, good morning, and welcome to you. Yes, alive for this morning, Sunday, October 27th, 2024. I'm the producer and host of Belize's only news review talk show. Yes, and we're well bragging about it here at XTV, simulcasting on Crumb Radio. We're also on YouTube, XTV Belize, and on Facebook page, XTV Belize. Give thanks to Papa Curly, whose music we use for the introduction and when the show ends. He's a Belizean artist. And so this morning, I tell you, XTV people must be tired of me. Because every Sunday review, there was a big Sunday review, that was urgent matter for me, and I really feel so. So our guest this morning is no stranger to this space. I think this may be his third time. It's our Breddah doc. He has a PhD, but typical people who I hang out with, they know that not identified him. But I say it to make everybody know that he has formal training, even though most of the degrees are colonial papers, European universities. But just to say that he is trained formally in the work that he does, and I tell you what he do. So we have our Guyanese Breddah from in the United States right now. Brother Nigel Westmass, who identifies as a scholar activist. Morning, Brother Nigel. Howdy, morning.
Marin, nice to meet you, and nice to hear your viewers, and greetings, YaYa.
Now, tell me, what you do every day? What are your everyday work?
Oh, well, as you know, I'm a formal scholar, which means I teach classes. I teach a course on global race and sports, another one currently, and another one called Blackness Across Diaspora. So on a typical day, I apart from exercising and watching cricket, I get down to the work of teaching, and then in the afternoon I would probably uh, go to the library and do some research if I have to. I like to collect books, new books. So I am always in search of new publication. What is good about here is that my college library, when you recommend a book, they purchase it. So I go and borrow first time and have it with me. So I don't have to buy the book myself. So I'm enjoying that. And of course, I do microfilm research as well with the old newspapers of Guyana and the region, which I find a very lovely hobby. So yes, that's my daily routine, so to speak, apart from eating.
Brother Nigel, I have a sister who say, you can't buy books, yeah, yeah. Your books only could take up so much space. You need to read online, but I like hold the
No,
book
I like the
right
physical
here.
book. Yeah, I like the physical book.
But how much space you could have say in your place, Brother
Well,
Nigel?
I have here, then I have an office. I have a huge fairly good spacious office. So a lot of the books are there, and then some are here too. The Guyanese books are here because I have to research them directly. And the other books that used in class are mostly on the campus. But I have a good set of books, and I'm now on the margin of the limit which you can have from the library is 200 and 300 books. I'm at 298, so I have to take back some books tomorrow.
How many do you think you own?
Oh, I own given the well, apart from the files, and so I own about maybe about 200 to 300 or 400 books around that scale. And
Damn.
I left them back home too in Guyana. But I was collecting books since I was small. So my father put me on a path to reading, you know. And since then, I never stopped reading physical books. I don't like to read online either, except for newspapers and things like that.
Good, 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 good. Sit down, book lover.
Yeah.
The reason why you're a guest today is because 17 days after August 1st, which is recognized as African Emancipation Day, even though most of these states, when they grant a public and bank holiday, they don't identify it as African Emancipation Day. And this is a reminder for UEF, Bad Education Foundation, to begin that campaign with the state of Belize that the holiday needs to be identified as African Emancipation Day so that you know the group of people who were emancipated. In 2021, when the state granted August 1st as a public and bank holiday, it also granted October 12th as Indigenous Peoples Resistance Day. In that case, they identified the people who, it wasn't just People's Resistance Day, it was Indigenous Peoples Resistance Day. So let today mark the first day of a campaign, UEF saying to the state, they need to go back and change the law for August 1st to be recognized as African Emancipation Day. So on the 17th of August, 2024, in an online newspaper called the Demerara Waves, it's an independent online newspaper, you wrote an opinion piece, the attempted co-option of African emancipation celebration. In that 11 paragraphs essay, you addressed a number of things. And I'll just briefly go over it so to set the stage so everybody know what this conversation about today. And I'll ask you to read the first two paragraphs. In the first
Okay.
paragraph, you look at African emancipation commemoration in Guyana, how it has been transformed into a spectacle. In the second paragraph, you describe what co-optation is. In the third paragraph, you looked at state leadership deflecting or ignoring the concerns of long-standing Guyanese organizations. In the fourth paragraph, you recognize that there was no in-depth analysis of what emancipation truly is. In the fifth paragraph, you looked at emancipation capture. In the sixth, that emancipation capture is not something unique to Guyana, it's a trend. In the seventh, as an example, you referred to African people in Colombia. In the eighth, you made the point of politicians at events, at cultural events, systemically. They're not like politicians just the corner events, so that. They're always the corner events. But the problem arises when these moments are exploited by the state to divide, co-opt, and create a spectacle for strategic political purposes. In the ninth paragraph, you focused on historical amnesia. In the 10th, stating that Guyana's challenge is to reclaim the narrative of African emancipation from the grips of political cooptation. And in the final paragraph, you looked at moving beyond symbolism, governments and institutions in power must engage in substantive actions and reforms that address the root causes of inequality and injustice. So, this I have to I tell you entire again. First off, I sleep because I so excited about the show I couldn't sleep, so I know I need to sleep. Second, I have to lower my voice because the other things will get me excited. And what really hyped me up even more, because I naturally hype, is when I live something and I know something to be true, and then you have someone like yourself who just to live your life and write it. I'm like, oh my gosh, here's what we're living in writing. And so that really, thank you so much for this timely, needed article. I don't know if anybody else ever wrote about it like the way you did. Do you know? Have you found any research of anyone looking at this?
Yes, there are several other Guyanese observers from the political opposition and independent African leaders of African groups who have been focusing on this issue as well, of the co-optation and of course globalizing it as well. I know of one, Brother Eric Phillips, and I know of David Hines, and there are others too who make this criticism of the state because they are directly involved as African Guyanese leaders of groups who were formerly leaders in the process of disentangling what emancipation means and bringing it to the public. And now they're facing threat from groups which are subservient to another state, trying to usurp their long tradition of dealing with these issues. So those are, there are other people who actually do this kind of work as well.
Before I read the first two paragraphs, why is it that it's often men doing this research?
What do you mean? Well, I don't think in this case, there were, in Guyana's case, I should say, there were women involved in the disentangling of that issue as well. For example, I know of Sister Benjamin, forgot her first name now. She is now abroad, but she was one of the first to address the question of emancipation in the newspapers, the Stabroek News, as well as writing about 1763 in a very informed way. And then there were other groups, African Cultural Development Association, which had a female leader at one point. So yes, I agree that right now you don't hear many female voices in the thing, but there were before. And then in the 1930s, there was a woman who pioneered the politics of the Guyana in a certain way, and she also addressed emancipation because Guyana has had a long history of Emancipation Day celebrations. So it went through several iterations over time. Under the colonial state, Emancipation Day was always celebrated, and even governors would appear at certain events. And so you had this, what you call a dance between the affirmation of African emancipation and the state's diplomatic reach of those groups to try to appease the state in a precarious situation in their own society, whether it's funding or acknowledgement of their day. So there's always this long struggle, a quiet struggle sometimes, and a more direct struggle over the agency of Emancipation Day in Guyana. But it's been a long tradition dating back to the first Emancipation, 1838. And I've seen this through the newspaper reports of various groups celebrating emancipation in the rural areas, in the villages, drumming, libations, ancestors, the whole gamut of it. And of course, later on, publications would intervene and talk about Emancipation Day under the colonial press. So the colonial press is a strange kind of creature. On the one hand, it was involved in white supremacy, but on the other hand, allowing its pages to be used sometimes by the ordinary people and African Guyanese in particular to proclaim their own cultural needs. So there was that kind of fight, but there's a fight at that time as well.
Good. Okay, go ahead and read the first two paragraphs of the opinion piece from the
Okay.
Marin way for us, please.
Yeah. The commemoration of African emancipation in Guyana has increasingly transformed into a spectacle where the central focus is on state sponsors and state presence rather than the historical and cultural significance of the event itself. The image of political leaders of the state dancing or prancing at the forefront of such events shifts the narrative from a genuine recognition of emancipation's painful, impactful history to a form of idolatry, where the leaders of the ruling party become the focal point rather than the substance and significance of emancipation for the affected communities. Vague references to progress and prosperity substitute for addressing directly with the participation of African Guyanese organizations via public education, the systemic connections between enslavement, emancipation, and the present. This performative strategy by the current state rings hollow. It can lead to dilution or sanitization of the true and ongoing meaning of emancipation, reducing it to a series of state-sanctioned performances rather than a powerful commemoration of resistance and liberation. The African psyche, which is deeply connected to the cultural and historical identity, can suffer from this erosion of genuine engagement, leading to feelings of alienation and loss of dignity and cultural groundings. In Guyana, this dynamic is evident in both the attempted and actual co-optation by the regime in power. Co-optation generally refers to the process by which a group or individual is absorbed or assimilated into a broader system of organization, often to negate potential and actual opposition or to gain support. This can occur in various domains, such as politics, business, or social movements. Co-optation can serve as a selective strategy to bring critics, opponents, or potential challengers into the fold, integrating them into existing power structure with the intention of neutralizing the threat they might pose from outside the system. So those are the two first paragraphs. I am hearing you.
How long have you been observing this honoring of our African ancestresses and ancestors in Guyana that it moved you to write that opinion piece this year?
Well, interestingly, I've been at Emancipation celebrations since I was involved in the Working People's Alliance actively at home in confronting a regime at the time, which was dictatorial. And of course, organizing that struggle against the regime meant integrating groups or part of the party. To go back to the original issue, the party which I belonged to was formed by a set of groups, both representing Indian and African cultural interests. For example, ASCRIA, African Society for Cultural Relations with Independent Africa, was formed in 1961 or thereabouts. And throughout the last couple of decades, it was involved in making, for example, bringing consciousness to African value systems, naming of people. For example, one of the elders who is still alive, Brother U.C. Kwano, was formerly Sidney King. He changed his name by deed poll in 1960s, mid-60s. And all of his supporters in that group went out to give education of African history, the African connections, the cultural connections, religions, all of that. So by the time the party was formed, you had elements of both Indian and African cultural systems and knowledge of those systems inside the party political, output. So, for example, we had drumming sessions in villages, and I used to attend them in Emancipation Day. And these were not connected directly with opposing the state, but were supported generally as Emancipation Day. And even the state had their own form of it at Independence Park. But what happened is that over time, groups became formed, as they usually do. Over time, you have groups coming and going. And you had cultural groups that belonged to the state and cultural groups that belonged to the opposition. And after a while, some of these groups became so powerful that they would hold the Emancipation Day at the National Park. And this without any too much pushback. People accepted that because people would come out in their thousands and support the day itself rather than supporting a political party. But what happened over the last couple years was that the state in power, which is mainly, you could say, Indo-dominated in terms of ethnic groups, but has a wish to try to co-opt African elements in order to break up the opposition to it historically, has embarked on a campaign which is not seen before, where even when they were in power, so that same group before the break, before they were lost power in 2015, when they were in power, African groups would recognize Indian occasions, but not try to go and co-opt it. And the state itself, when they were in power, did not when the opposition state was in power, did not attempt to co-opt Indian events and to make it their own, or to try to bring Indian Guyanese religious leaders or cultural activists into the fold of the state, but they allowed the celebration to go on as integral parts of the Indian community. So what has happened now in the last 3 or 4 years is a conscious effort by the state to actually directly co-opt and control Emancipation Day through narratives, through money, disbursements, and through media and other forms of catchment, I could say, right? So that is why I would say I intervened, because I saw this trend. It's a very disturbing trend. But I was not the only one. Those groups, affected groups, protested as well. And I saw the need to write this article trying to bring all the elements together.
It was timely as it relates to Belize, and I am so appreciative of this piece because the organization that I'm the spokesperson for, YaYa Educational Foundation, the fourth pillar of the only African Black independent-owned media house in the region, it was initially the idea of the person who was the chairperson before me. She's an African-American woman named Virginia Eccles. And in 2014, it was her idea for UEF to organize the community as it relates to commemorating our African ancestresses and ancestors on African Emancipation Day. So we started to do that. And then we've had awesome community support. We reached out to other African people within the region. Usually we would bring someone in. We've had Mama Baina Bello from IT. We've had Sister Patricia Rodney from Guyana. We've had, since this past African Emancipation Day, Sister Esther Jose, who is of Barbadian and Guyanese ancestry from the UK. We've had Mutabaruka from Jamaica. We've had some powerhouses come in and share with us. And UEF is a genuinely grassroots community-based organization. So we usually seek funding from the state because it's the state's obligation to fund cultural, historical groups. And it has been a steady process of tug and war, especially under the former administration, which the majority of the cabinet members were identifiable African people racialized as Black people. I mean, just dishonoring in their communication. It's like they're doing you a favor. Again, I say to Belizean people and those listening abroad that being a part of a media house is what has been one of UEF's biggest strength, to bring these things to the community's attention. And so in 2021, when this administration, which does not have a majority identifiable African descendants racialized as Black people, yet let me be very clear in this statement, the Deputy Prime Minister, who's an identifiable African descendant racialized as a Black man, is the son of the patriarch of this media house. So in 2021, when it became a public and bank holiday under this administration, the state then needed a face, because UEF said to them, okay, it's the first year, it's 2021. We don't trust you because the state has never been kind or just to African descendants racialized as Black people. They're the ones who enslaved our people. I will work with you all. And sure enough, they betrayed us. I'm not at liberty to say the financial component of it, but I will say we're organizing with them. And then someone sends me a text and said, do you know they're having a press conference? And I'm thinking, how could they we're organizing with them. How could they go and have a press conference and not tell us? Or I said, that's it. So I took the check from them and told them I'm done. And I will keep applying for the funding because we have a right to, but I am done with the state because of how they are. So they needed a Black face. So then another Black organization agreed to be co-opted. And so and that's 2021, 2022, 2020, we're at 2024. Now it's become a big bashment. It's Igbo tongue festivals, musicians and foods and arts and crafts. So now we have, whereas we would have had a larger audience at our UEF community reasoning, where the guest speaker would have a serious reasoning about where we came from as African people on the continent of Africa, our period of enslavement, colonization, neocolonization, and where we are as a people, and it's up to us to come up with solutions. We have less people coming now because they're at the bashment. And so when I saw the article, I was just so thankful and knew that I had to get you on as a guest before this Gregorian year was over. It's 11 o'clock, so we have to take the first break. But stay tuned because Breddah Nigel Westmass, Guyanese scholar activist, will share some more with us on the opinion piece he wrote in the Demerara Wave on the 17th of August this year. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. I guess we're gonna break now. I definitely you and gotta make the majority of the next hour, because co-option is not a word that we're used to hearing. And I really think that sometimes people, that is not their intention to be co-opted. They went in with good intentions, and if they become aware of it, then don't get ahead in a tiger mouth already.
Yes.
But what happens is they then lose credibility. And it's the hardest thing to gain credibility back from our people once you lose credibility. So I really want to, it's up to you how you want, but I really want you to dissect the piece, because every paragraph was just a body blow and a truth teller. And we have to have these conversations and hold the state accountable, because the state has pretty much co-opted the voices of African people in the so-called Caribbean. When you look at CARICOM and the 10-point reparations plan, which is not, it's not a reparations plan, the 10-point plan. That's an economic development plan. It's not a reparations plan. And it always get me how, when they say CARICOM, they're not talk about all African descendants in the Caribbean region. So that, and then they're not talk about the people that were no longer in that region, live at a part of the world, but they still have their identity in the Caribbean people. So this whole CARICOM head of state could talk to African people that are the biggest co-option when it comes to African reparations. But a lot of us just in a survival mode, so we don't got time for the study that. I don't know what happened to it, brother. Somebody say, "YaYa, why you keep doing this? Like you say, like seriously."
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what you've been waiting for. In this corner, we have
So I sure I never, I don't know, I quite capable as a thing, right? Well, not for everybody is. But in this case, I don't believe I did. So the ancestresses and ancestors are with us. No problem. It was a mistake. Life happens. I'm here with Brother Nigel Westmass, Guyanese color activist. Brother Nigel, how you describe what a scholar activist is?
Oh well, it's a process, an organic process. You never realize it until it happens. But in my case, I grew up in a country where I attended when I was my first political instinct was when I attended um, a meeting under Walter Rodney's house as a young stripling youngster. I was invited to go there, and he was speaking about history, Guyanese history, and he was a professor. And when I vaguely knew him at the time, I didn't know who he was in that scale, but there was a huge turnout of people, free education, and that was my first inkling that this guy was a tremendous scholar of international repute, and yet he was teaching, giving free classes to people and talking in ordinary parlance. And then subsequently, I was involved with him in the struggle in Guyana and even ran with him on the streets. He was a great orator. And of course, his scholarship was huge and immense. And so he wrote a book called Groundings in the 1960s, which typified his own role as breaking the mold of what an academic should be. And especially in Jamaica, he was one of the first. There were two people who went to meet with the Rastafari, and you mentioned Matabaruka, meant to reach the Rastafari in Jamaica directly from the University of the West Indies, and he was one of them. And so he had this interaction with the Rastafari. They gave him, they're very proud people. They gave him hell in terms of their own narration of history, and he gave them back his knowledge of African history, but they respected him. So when he was banned from Jamaica in 1968, there was a huge uprising because he couldn't go back into the island because the conservative government feared his contact with the masses, ordinary poor people, as a scholar. So that element in Walter Rodney translated into the Guyanese situation almost organically. And I, as a young person, when I began to get into my own academic mold, I considered this as a very important aspect of public education. And I saw that the Ivy Tower thing you just mentioned earlier in the program, you mentioned how the doctor thing came down in a kind of a hierarchical format, and I agree. And so the formal degree doesn't matter. There's a brother, as I mentioned before, Brother UC Koyani is 99 years old. He lives in Atlanta now. His mind is as fertile as ever. He might be weak in body and eyesight, but his brain is fantastic. And he's not a formal doctor. He has probably a correspondence economics degree in London, but he's an amazing treasure of information. He's brilliant beyond belief in all spheres, from economics, constitution, culture, arts, you name it, he does it. And so I have a kind of an inclination to what is called scholar activism, wherever it comes from. And I don't really identify as such directly, but I think I'm such because I do public education. So I write for the newspaper in Guyana in columns which are intended to be simplified. And I also speak on Zoom calls. I teach a course in Guyana through Zoom. And I do these kinds of stuff. And at my own university, I go into public protests. I'm in charge or a mentor or advisor for a Black and Latinx student union. So I'm directly involved with student struggles as well. And I go and protest at the university as well when they're, like, for example, when George Floyd or when Eric Garner was choked in New York, we went on a protest on the street on the campus, and police came up and things like that. So I'm involved directly in public education and in active work on the ground, and that is what I call a scholar activist.
Thank you so much for broke that down, for explaining it like you did. Again, this is one of my joys in relearning from a colonized mindset, that I was living that life and I didn't know there was such a terminology. And again, this is not something where I usually talk because there's nothing for talk about. Prior to being deported from the United States, when you're gonna States, you have to find ways to live, right? And I pretty soon learned that once you got colonial papers, states will hire you for do just about anything. Instead of, so I have a certification in a plumbing. Never do one day of plumbing in my life. But you have people who have been plumbing for years and are really good, and they cannot get a job because they don't have piece of paper, but they know
Yeah.
what they're doing. Then here
Mhm.
comes me with a piece of paper, no, know nothing about plumbing, but they're willing to give me one job. So once I understood that that's how you come up in the United States, then I start to get to a stack of papers. And then what make it even better for me, I found that if you worked at the university, you don't have to pay for the education. And
Yeah.
I make sure when I got for the job, I work in a financial aid offices because I want to learn
Ah,
how this money work. So I
yeah.
worked in the financial aid office at Hampton University, which is the um, Ivy League for African historically Black colleges and universities, and then eventually went on to work at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, in the financial aid office again. And so since I could go to school for free is what made me go to school. And both my parents are lifelong learners. And so that's just a way of life for us. The four children my mom and dad had together.
Mhm.
My parents are Gina and Roque Marin, and the sisters I'm talking about are Beverly, Zenzele, Mahogany Marilyn, and
Lovely names.
Mandisa and Gozi Roxanne. I have other siblings as well, and I claim
Yeah.
every last one of them that I'm a sister and brother. Even though we
Mhm.
have different mothers, they
Yes,
are my sisters and brothers, which is another thing
exactly. That's
because
how it should be.
in families that have multiple siblings from other parents, and I often say to people, my mom is what would be identified as a Creole woman, and the other woman who my dad has children with was a Garifuna woman. And
Oh.
so I grew up in the 70s, and there was historically colorism between those two African groups in Belize. And then my mom taught us to discriminate against Garifuna people. And so because my dad chose to have a relationship with a Garifuna woman, even more so she pushed that in our head. Now, my mom is a spirit and I'm not telling a lie. She know I say it when I'm alive because it's true. Now, I'm saying, how can I, as a conscious African sister, call other African kinfolks my brothers and sisters and not claim my own blood, like immediate bloodline, just because they were a different mother? And it wasn't only her, there's two other mothers. And so that's why I'm like I own, claim every one of my sister and brother. I know I call it name, because I give him permission, but I know the other three, I might not call it name because I call all like I said, if I have 12 hours. Anyways, Hiva Longshore. So the point I was making is that is because it's difficult to pick a miseducation cost, like to get those formal degrees cost a bag of money. But because I had the opportunity to work at universities in the financial aid office, I collected, and I really collected, a bag of colonial papers. So when I had asked I'll shut up directly. But it's related to what we're talking about when you talk about scholar activism. When I asked the people in the community, the hood, the LA, what I could do for make money that states, there are my advisors now, specifically in the jungle of LA. They say you should have been one plumber or a mechanic because you always need them and they charge a lot of money by the hour. So listening to them for their advice, I got a Los Angeles State Technical College and decided to be a plumber. Look here, I never did so poorly in a school, I don't think ever, but I got straight C's in all my core subjects for plumbing. But as an elective, I took an African American course, and that was it. I was blown up. Once I took that first course, I say, I don't know what I have to do for the rest of my life, but this is all I want to do for the rest of my life. And so, and then I took a philosophy course, and I'm like, philosophy, religion, and history, and I was done. So that when I went to study, I never know what I want to do. So then I said, well, just get a general degree. You could be a teacher, you can get a leave it to everything. So I got a liberal arts degree as my bachelor's degree. And then, okay, now since I did in the education system, I said, well, I'm going for a master's. I'm like, where I want to study? I'm like, African history. So I get a master's in African history. But then I realized that most of my professors, even though they knew the content, they were piss poor teachers. So whereas most people went on to get PhDs from a master's program, and I was offered a full ride for a PhD at a traditional white institution, at the first time I ever walk out of my school, I'm like, "Nah, my psyche can't deal with this. Because I was going to HBCUs anyways. I got and I get to a second master's for teach me how to teach, pedagogy. So then because I got two masters then, one of my professor who actually came to Belize this year, give me, because you know how they go, you'll get to a lead adjunct professor. I mean, you get a lead TS. So he give me a run. I taught as an adjunct professor for almost 2 semesters at Florida A&M University. But then I had to come home because I was having immigration issues. And I realized in that almost 2 semesters, this is not for me. This your bad word, that not for me. No, I don't know what that for me, but that teaching in a classroom, that not for me. And it was when I came home to Belize, of course I went to Zing Fence because everybody know Evan had Black people business. And that's how come I later came to learn that what I do is color activism. Because I'm always researching. I want to be around people like you and others who know more than me, who know different than me, who are living what they're researching. And big respect to brother, what the elder name, what is Atlanta?
Brother, you see Koyana.
Big respect to brother Isi Kewana. We don't know enough about that brother.
Yeah, he's was one of the founders of the political movement in Guyana, and he was involved. He actually wrote the party songs for all 3 main political parties in Guyana at one time. He is also he pioneered certain types of African history and cultural teaching of the history in the community. But he's also an elder and a thinker, a philosopher, constitutional genius, economist. He has all of the embrace, but he's also very down to earth. And he never, he's always of course, he's also very, I think the reason why he's lived to 99 is because he stopped eating cooked food since 1948. So he doesn't eat cooked food. So the man eats garlic and he eats fruit and he eats juice and things like that. Doesn't eat anything that is cooked. So he's really, his mind is as fertile as ever. He just published a news article today's newspaper. I mean, a letter. So he's going good but we all look up to him,
Thanks for sharing that. And another note, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about it. Why and I tell people, it's not that I don't encourage people to go and get a colonial paper, but if all you're doing is getting a colonial paper and you yourself are not awakened to your consciousness, to who you are as an African person, for example, then you just getting a colonial paper makes life more difficult for people like us who are doing the work, because it's just another enslaved mind, and we don't need another enslaved mind. And so to be able to be a scholar activist puts individuals in a stronger position to hold the state accountable in a position like the one that you're holding states accountable for.
Yeah.
So many of us don't even know what co-option is. I just learned maybe in the past 3 years. But you sent me, and this is one of the joys I get again. I don't have one 9 to 5 by choice. So I don't own one decent house. The house I stay in at my sister house, the Vista del Mar, because my house is guaranteed underwater right now. But that's my choice. But I get to enjoy out of research and learning. So you send me, I shall send it to the MCO. You sent me a document and I immediately sent it to, of course I sent it to my people's there. But the document that you sent, and I wanted to share it so that you could go ahead and share what you're going to share with us about the article that you wrote. You sent me the Marcus Garvey and Universal Negro Improvement Association papers, the Caribbean Diaspora 1910 to 1920. And it was, it was, the editor-in-chief was Robert A. Hale, blah, 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 blah. But in that article, it was mentioned that the Black Cross nurses in Belize were co-opted by the state. And so just to make Belizean people know that this is not something new, what happened. This has been systemic. Let me just read this portion quickly, and then we'll ask Brother Nigel to expand on it. It says the Black Cross nurses represented accommodation with the colonial administration, which effectively co-opted them and use them as welfare workers that address the symptoms of poverty rather than its causes. In part, this reflected the limitations of the Garveyite movement itself, which concentrated on culture and race to the exclusion of class divisions in society, which sought accommodation with the colonial administration. The same thing you say, this are 1920s. 2024, the same thing you say, Brother Nigel. Talk to it.
Yeah. Yeah, you put an excellent spin on it there. I didn't see that actually from British Honduras slash Belize, but it's quite normal way in which the colonial state operated in terms of eking out individuals from the black middle class, or in later cases the Indian middle class, and pulling them into the system, and thereby creating a division. Sometimes they did organically, sometimes they did deliberately, but nonetheless, it was part of their policy. But in terms of the Garvey movement itself, it is quite interesting because, as you pointed out, the Garvey movement was very protean. That is very, it was very, what you might call diverse in how it dealt with issues in different localities. So, for example, in Guyana, the Garvey movement might be more pro-labor and much more active in terms of attacking the colonial state than, say, another place, maybe in the United States or wherever. So Garvey was so absorbed with himself that he tried to do all things for all people. So you left it to his groups in various places to take their own agency and deal with the Garvey universal principles and carry it forward. So it is because of the nature of the movement, it was in danger of being co-opted, but it was also active in support of movements like the labor movement in Guyana, like the cultural workers movement like the anti-racist movement in the United States. All in every locality, the government was subversive in a certain way. So much so that in 1919, I don't know if this happened in Belize, but the colonial state, the British colonial state throughout the empire, had a thing called the Seditious Publications Bill in 1919, which meant it was directly, in this case in Guyana, directed against the Negro World newspaper of the Garvey movement, and similarly in St. Lucia and St. Vincent elsewhere. So why did they have to stop the Negro World? Because the Negro World was giving information about what's going on in Africa, what's going on in resistance in the United States, elsewhere. So even though the Black Cross nurses might be co-opted in Belize, in that context, there are other groups of the Garvey movement fighting this colonial state in other localities, with or without Garvey's express support or sanction. And for example, in 1921 or thereabouts in the United States of America, Garvey did the unthinkable. He had a meeting with the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in New York. He met with the Ku Klux Klan to say that I'm the leader of the Black movement and you're the leader of the secret white movement, and we can have a real politic pact. So what you're saying there is not inconsistent with how the Garvey movement operated, but what is consistent is how co-optation was used throughout history to bring people on board. And the co-optation could take the form under slavery of the uses of what Malcolm X would call the house Negroes and the field Negroes, quote unquote. While Malcolm X was being rhetorical and being, in context of the United States, it was a fact that if you're in the house, you tended to be more accommodating to the master because you have more of the master's food and the master's word and the master's ear, and your family might benefit from it. But it's not to say that there were no house enslaved who did not rebel against the master, many. Matter of fact, a lot of the rebellions in the New World, a lot of them were led by people who were part of the co-opted state. Part of the co-optation of the state and who rebelled. So again, even though co-optation is there, it is a protean issue. It's a thing that moves and oscillates in condition. But yes, to your point, I think it was a consistent trait of the colonials in all parts of the world, even though it might not have been named so at the time, to bring people in from their group, whether it's enslaved field, what you call it, the field drivers, the drivers of the slaves who were Black, or the Native Amerindians who were used to catch enslaved people in Guyana. All of those people are part of the state apparatus. And so you see a modern iteration of it used now by modern states who have resources And when they see opposition or they see groups that they want to control or sanction or repress, what they do is to try to either find other groups to replace them because they can't do the repression thing fully. So they would bring them in and say, hey, see, we're in support of Black liberation, albeit our folks involved in it, and they were given the resources of the state. Exactly what you paint in terms of beliefs, but exactly what's happening in Guyana currently.
Excellent, excellent, brother. I tell you earlier, I said I'm doing the work I was called to do, and then when I get affirmations like this article that you sent, it just confirms for me that I'm doing the work I was called to do. In Belize, in July 22nd, 1919, there was an uprising of Tong folks in Belize. And the state called it the Ex-Servicemen League, saying that it was soldiers returning from the war. And that is a part of the story, but that was really the singular narrative that they were sharing. In 2019, UEF worked with Imagination Factory, and we did a walk through the main streets of Belize City, similarly to where the riot was in 1919. But going back to the article that you shared with me, and it's talking about some of those people, it says some of the people who were most involved in these events in 1919 were among Garvey's chief supporters, including Herbert Hill Kane of the Belize Independent and Samuel A. Haynes, who had been a member of the British West Indies Regiment. Listen to this part. The commission concluded that Kane's article on race riots in the UK that appeared in his paper on the 16th July contributed to the riots in Belize on 22nd July. But anger about the colonial officials' suppression of the Negro world the preceding February and about colonial and about high prices in the stores also inflamed anti-white, anti-merchant, and anti-colonial feelings. Certainly one of the consequences of the riots was increasing support for Garveyite ideas and institutions. So and I tell Belizean people is because we don't know our stories, like high prices, inflation, again, same thing happening in 2024. But what was distinctly different about our African people then, because this is primarily Belize Town, the Center for African Descendants, Creole Culture, and Political Life, is their consciousness, their awareness primarily because of the Negro world and the soldiers' experience. And then our enslaved people living among enslavers and hearing the conversations, that they had a level of political awareness. And I remember most of them can't read or write, but had and knew how to organize and, working up for their best interests.
Yes.
So I was just amazed.
Yeah, you put it brilliantly there. Because you held all the strands there. You put all the strands. The disaffected soldiers who came back from the war treated very badly in the war effort, even though they went on behalf of the colonial empire. The Garveyite movement in the colony itself was struggling, in this case, against racism and economic deprivation. And then you have, of course, the reaction of the state. So those were, as you said, political education moments, which even if you don't have an education, you could know it. And this happened throughout Guyanese history as well. People just find the means and knowledge to hear what is going on elsewhere. And the Negro world was one transmission, but Negro world was actually very interesting because young boys in Kenya and elsewhere, when the Garvey movement had spread the Negro world, if there were no copies of Negro world, young boys would memorize the pages of the article or the editorial and go and read it to villagers in Kenya, in Nairobi. And so it spread further than the paper itself, right? And this is recorded by a professor, Winston James, who wrote a history of Claude McKay and Garvey and things like that. He talked about this issue about little boys would memorize articles from the Negro world and go and read it to villagers. And they themselves would get enamored and say, oh, this is going on. We could do it here too. And also, but even if they didn't hear, they would do it there too. So yes, you hit on a brilliant point there about public awareness and public reaction and the destitution and what how people coherently rebelled against the system, and it's all over the empire. It's all over. The map of resistance. It never stopped. There's a book called Domination, the Arts of Resistance by James Scott, who looks at global resistance over time. And he makes the point that resistance takes many forms. Even the passive resistance, which people tend to take as not non-resistant is resistant. For example, malingering, burning the cane stalks or not cutting it right, ingesting mud to get a stomach upset, running away from the plantation. All of those are seen historically as passive resistance, but are usually active resistance because it breaks the foundation of the state. And that is why the state from them goes for other laborers, like indentured laborers from China and India and Africa itself, to come in to replace labor, as happened in Belize and as happened in Guyana, when they had to find new labor. So it happened differently in Guyana, of course, because you had the village movement and you had a massive amount of Indian indentured laborers coming from India and even making the bigger population, which is part of the problems we have today in terms of ethnic division. So, but your point is well taken about how incipient the issue is at the moment and how different it is now, that even with all of this social media we tend to have people who don't react in the same way, maybe because the aspiration levels might not have been reached at that critical mass, but throughout history, people find a moment to react. So as Lenin said, decades pass, nothing happens, and then weeks pass and decades happen.
I was listening to I don't know, because again I couldn't sleep. I know we have to go to a break directly. I couldn't sleep last night because of my excitement. So I say, you know what? I don't study Brother Nigel enough. Maybe I go read some of the thing that when he writes. But I'm like, yeah, if you read, you're not going to sleep. So I say, okay. I turn off the light and I just want to lay down here. So at least I could listen to her. So then I started putting your name in on YouTube and learn more about the Demerara rebellion and the
Okay.
details of it. And so this is, when I hear, my hope is that I will learn the stories of African people so well in Belize that I could just say it in a detail, in a Creole. I close
Yes.
my eye and imagine what the space look like, what for people it look like, what for we people in Ganchu, and then I listen to what happened in Guyana, and then I learn more about Suriname, and I'm just thinking, my goodness, this is what they do to we, and what the harm has continued. It's more
Yes.
sophisticated, but the harm has continued, and that's why the state now have no legal, moral, ethical right to speak on behalf of African descendants in the region at no CARICOM meeting, at no Commonwealth meeting as it relates to African reparations. It's one of the biggest cooptation of CARICOM of African people's hurts, how they have monetized it. And all of a sudden, if you have a colonial paper, you that are expert on African reparations, and then you don't have, at least I don't know them. I would like to know them if they're credible people within the region who have a similar policy, practice, action as you. We have to say the harm continues. The first part of reparation is that the harm must stop and it must never repeat itself before we could look for
Yes.
any repair. The biggest repair, like Professor Chinweza said, is repairing ourselves. That's the biggest repair that needs to happen. So the co-optation that you wrote about in August 17th, 2024 in the online independent newspaper, the Marara Wave, is from within communities all the way to the top heads of states, the AU, the whole kit of them. And because that is the singular narrative that people keep hearing, then they don't know any different. And because it's usually about compensation for people that suffer the harm, so they want money. So there's it's really where they're taking advantage of people not knowing. Anyways, make I go to break. And stay tuned on with Brother Nigel Westmass, scholar activist from Guyana, living in the United States. I'm gonna go to YouTube and put in Nigel Westmass. So you can learn in different ways. You know, we have to take responsibility for our own learning. You could listen, you could watch. If you don't want to read, you write a lot too. You could go up online and put it in there. You could read a lot of articles where you write. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Tired of replacing light bulbs, LEDs,
patriots. All people who love them country bad, bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This a me name is Pupa.
Welcome back to the final segment of Sunday Review for this morning, Sunday, October 27th, 2024. We're with Brother Nigel Westmass. Brother Nigel, you were saying while we were talking during the break, you were surprised that Belize only recognized African Emancipation Day as a public and bank holiday in 2021. Now, prior to UEF having this conversation publicly, and remember we have our own media house, we did not know, we thought we were the first group of Belizean people, African descendants, to recognize African Emancipation Day. But as I did the research, I found out in 1888, there were a group of African Belizeans led by Simon Lamb, who, according to the state narrative, they associated Simon Lamb primarily with August 10th, which YaYa describes as the British-Spanish armed skirmish, but the state narrative is a Battle of St. George's Key, and the recognition of that by Simon. That's the only thing we recognize Simon Lamb's name with. At no point was Simon Lamb acknowledged, given credit for, along with sisters, in 1888, 50 years after 1838.
Right.
I don't know if UF didn't bring this forward, if that was ever been, so that now, listen now, in this last African Emancipation Day, now they have a bust of Simon Lamb. There's a whole Simon Lamb narrative. I'm like, they think we fool? Like seriously, and I'm saying the state have access to the archives. If they were really serious about, they like to use the word decolonization, but it's lip service for the most part.
Yeah.
I will give credit to there's the Institute of Social and Cultural Research under Niche. The new director is Rolando Cocom, who is very different from the former director. And I have a working relationship with him and his team. And that's the only way that we're engaging the state right now as an official entity. And I can be honest with him about the positions that we have, and they're willing to work with us in different ways. But
can I ask a question about that though? Yeah. So do you have in the archives, do you have newspapers in the archives dating back to the 19th century, or what are they in terms of like newspapers? Is it just government dispatches?
No, they do. They have I haven't been to the archives enough, but I think I sent you a link. I think it was in 2021. The state put up this website where they have some of the documents from newspapers, colonial documents.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's just a little snippet. It's not even a lot, but I'm saying they were always there. I don't know what they intend. It's like when they're ready. And then another thing is that now they have this new initiative. It's called the Belizean Studies. I can't remember, maybe it was 2018 that they started it. A group of us were with them in the working committee and we walked away because really it's a very sanitized version of Belizean stories. And so it's usually the state, again, acting as if we don't need to have meaningful conversation with people who are doing the work before the state decided to do the work, like the African organizations and groups in Guyana. If those people are doing the work for all these years, shouldn't they have been invited? Shouldn't they have gone in those spaces and have conversation about African reparations? These people have been doing the work for years. Coromandel have been doing it for 55 years. So before the state does anything in the name of African descendants, which realizes Black people, they should have sit down with the people who have a track record of having meaningful research and share it with people in real time.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen.
The reason why I asked you is that in Guyana's case, a lot of the newspapers in Guyana itself for that period is very badly mangled. We have terrible archives in terms of the physical copies. So if in 19th century articles, out of the question, maybe you might want one paper, you might have for 1883, you might have, you can turn the page, otherwise the page disintegrates because of age. But what has happened with the British in their infinite wisdom, colonial wisdom, they have what's called microfilm. So they scan these documents. So when I want to do the Guyanese research, I go to the interlibrary loan and I get a microfilm of all newspapers in Guyana, and I go through it on a particular machine which can telegraph. So I print it out, and I could see 1888, 1920, 1960s, all the way up. And so the ones that are apps not available in Guyana, I could do it. So I wanted to know for Belize, if there's a national paper called, let's say, Belize Times of 19th century, if it's available in the British archives, and if there's an equivalent in the Belizean physical archives, which is absent or not, and if your group can do an inventory of that, it would be useful. But also I could find, possibly by interlibrary loan, Belizean newspapers in the 19th century right up here. And you could, and you never know what you could find in those documents.
We do have some things on microfilm. A lot of the documents have been lost due to fires, hurricanes. The colonial state intentionally said, move the documents from out of the settlement and carry them somewhere else. It was one of the joys when I was working on my first master's degree in Tallahassee, Florida, because again, this is new to me, to go into a library. And I'm like, you could actually see these, like, when they self-read, I was just blown. Like, I could sit on there for hours.
Yes, looking at old documents.
And looking at old documents. And I know the Institute of Social and Cultural Research is working on the same thing. Now, sometimes, how I want to find out about anything, I see one article in the newspaper, I'm like, how are they just going to decide to do this and not have any communication with us? And we're the people that you say that whose stories that you're telling. So I like what you just pitched. I will approach the director of NICH, the Institute of Social and Cultural Research. That's a good initiative. We could now remember, even though I say we have that primarily just me to do the work, it's a lot of lifting. And I'm thankful for community support and for people like yourself. It's 11:48, Brother Nigel. It never got exactly like I even think, but it may reach that way I may hope. So at this point, what is happening? What has been the response to this article from people in Guyana or your colleagues?
You know, nowadays, social media is so omnipresent. There are many, many areas of communication. So I knew that people read the article. I got favorable comments from many of my colleagues for putting everything in, cohesive fashion. But Guyana is, as you know, is very, there are many, many media outlets in Guyana. There's social media, there's Facebook. There's a lot of people have their own programs, both the state and the opposition. There are several newspapers, about 5 or 6 main newspapers, which also have their own columns and letters. So in a sense, the Amaraways is very popular in terms of its reach, and people use it for opinion pieces, both the state and the opposition. So it will reach a wide audience, but in terms of actual interrogation of it, and so I think some of these things are lost in the confusion of so much media nowadays, and so I won't put a lot of prospects about a debate around it, except it will keep coming back up. In that sense, yes, it will be a permanent record. But yes, apart from a few flurries of responses, I haven't seen anything substantial, except the other groups. Some of them use some of the material to explain, for example, the Afro-Colombian experience and the Afro-Bolivian experience, which are similar in terms of, again, the state intervening and trying to break up organizations that are African descendants, but in those cases, more directly trying to limit African consciousness because they're racist, Afro-Colombian state apparatus and things like that. So there are different responses in different places. But yes, I think it will stand the test of time, but maybe it has to be reinserted and updated next year when August comes around, because we want to see what will happen next. Will there be more co-optation? Will there be a pull-off? Because the back. And you mentioned, very important, I forgot to mention, you mentioned bashment earlier in the Belize case. We have the similar things happening in Guyana too. They hire somebody from Jamaica, dancehall artists or some other big group, and they bring them in simultaneously with the event of the traditional African groups in order to break up and bring populations across there. It failed in August because Emancipation Day in the National Park is so big now, and it's run by an organization called African Cultural Development Association, which now has, in a sense, a control over it. So even the state couldn't control it, and even their diversion event didn't break up it still had thousands. And even the ministers of the state came to Emancipation Day in the park because they couldn't break it. But they will be on the watch out for how they will do the next time around, because there are, with oil money, they'll try to do everything possible to break the back of what they see as political resistance to the state, and to see it coming through the African descendant organizations, which happen to be close to the political parties who are in opposition to in the state and ethnically divided society.
You made, again, it's very, you're making the connections, and I'm very pleased that you said that, because they don't stop with the co-option. So I don't know if Christy can, if Alexa can show this. It was last month's Mandela newspaper front page, decoding the past, reading archival records on enslavement and emancipation in Belize. And then they have the president of the University of Belize, Dr. Vincent Palacio. And I'm like, how the hell they just decide that no conversation with UF, you know? But you could see where, again, the co-option. Now, this is the University of Belize. With no communication with us. And so these are the things that we really have to hold the state accountable for. UF is in conversation with an element of the University of Belize to have Sister Esther Jose teach African reparation courses. It should begin in January of 2025. We had some deadlines that UF had to meet to get a memorandum of understanding signed, but we haven't gotten that far yet, but we hope to do that before the year is over. And that's what I'm saying, even though I don't want to have nothing to do with the states. One Sister Esther came and met with representatives from UB and from the Institute of Social and Cultural Research. It was really a healthy conversation. And so we're hopeful in that way. So it's for me, it's learning that we could hold the state accountable, yet there's still, whereas like Mossad would say, there can be no change without engagement. And I'm saying these are just hostile spaces. It's just not good for our well-being, for the length of time we're doing the work to keep engaging the state, where they're having this conversation with you as if they have good intentions, but then they do something else. I'm like, it can't, they talk about the two. And one of the things I appreciate about having the Marcus Garvey conversation, which I didn't think that we would, is that when people hear the UNIA, they think of everyday working class people. And just people. But in the Belize case, it was, and I think you had said it as well, it was a middle class, respectable people thing, so that people like Vivian C., who are just the first woman justice of the peace in Belize, gang and get colonial, OBE or MB or whatever, they start to, so this is what I'm talking about. The minute you say, it's like NGOs, they suck the life out of communities of credible people, hardworking people who are genuinely working in the interests of their people. And then they start to offer them jobs, they start to offer them colonial papers, they offer them positions, they start to travel. No, I can't say I blame the people, because many of us are just working class people who really want a better life. But material and individual gains is not, it can never be worth what our African ancestors and ancestors went through to be here. So make I just say that last part for you before you go, Brother Nigel. The dangling things in front of individuals. And then I make the public know that they dangle the thing there, you know.
No, they don't know that. Yeah. No, but you had on a good point there. You know, I don't know where. I mean, you could tell when global, the whole NGO issue is tied to the global capitalist movement abroad, when they start to put the IMF squeeze on people in the third world, quote unquote third world, and broke up all the economies and things like that. Eventually, they came in now with this new thing of their localized money. Some of them, you know, probably well-meaning, but they came in to say, oh, we can handle this sector and this sector, climate, this, that. And then, as you said, what happened is that people jumped on it because it's an avenue for material progress, and they don't see the wider picture of dealing with the entire state apparatus and people themselves in terms of changing and transforming the economy for the betterment of the people. And so NGOs did have eventually turned out to be a very, very reactionary group of bodies, and still destroyed Haiti. And now you have this issue that you mentioned, the material gains of a state like Guyana with oil money resources, with Exxon. You know, Exxon has all of these. Exxon provides money for the cricket ground. Exxon money provides children school kits and things like that. So what they do is to buy into the imagination that Exxon will help you, and they don't see the vast amount of money. That money there is not even taxes. Exxon could afford to do that. They sponsor things. They have so much money, it's unbelievable, $1 trillion. And yet, these little trickles are seen as material progress for people who are impoverished. And so a section of the population can be bought and co-opted. It happened before, and that is what is happening currently now in Guyana and elsewhere in the region. And so, yes, it's a sad state of affairs. And what is needed is conscious organization to keep the pressure on. Because as you know, in the Creole saying, one dirty build down. And the work that you do in your program and your group is very, very important, because even the state is responding to you, albeit haphazardly. It shows that your work is very foundational. And I think that has to be they have to be held to the fire. But you also have to find new innovative ways of reaching people. And I think going back sometimes to the community itself and speaking directly to people is very powerful. And also using social media in more creative ways. So it's a long uphill struggle, but I think the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, as Martin Luther King says.
Respect, brother. I appreciate your guidance. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being patient with me, for work with me today. This show will repeat at 5:30 today. And the security guard is Brother Lloyd Lewis. In XTV, we have our sister Alexis Bilal. At Great Sacrifice, Alexis came in today. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Alexis. And then in Creme Radio, we have Brother Larry G. We could not do the work that we do here at XTV, Creme Radio, Amandala UEF, without consistent community support. I mean, it is just, we focus on a lot on the challenges of African descendants, which lies as Black people, because it's true, we live it. And sometimes we don't give enough credit to the joys, to the solidarity, to the feeling of belonging to a wider African community, inclusive of the continent of Africa, and how uplifting it is to know that we just carried the baton. There were people who came before us, years before us, who were advocating for African reparations, years. Just like the so-called emancipation of African people, they're not a European grant we no freedom, because we're still not free. That our, like Brother Nigel and I have been saying, is the resistance. African people never accepted the condition of being enslaved. Never. Never. I'm gonna listen this morning again to this badass brother. The brother from the Demerara Rebellion, when they come from, he mean, you know, want to take a bush. But I'm not running on. He just started to walk slow, like, shoot me, because I got a contour, no? And I know the run. I'm like, what a brother name?
Oh, coming now?
Yes. Yes. I was like, I could just see, you know, this take a bush kind of look for a long time.
There's another guy in the, just before you close, there's another guy in the 76 revolt. That's many years before, about 50 years before, it was the earliest revolt in Berbice, where one of the leaders of the revolt, not Kofi, but Fortune, he was captured after the Dutch had defeated Kofi, and he was tortured by the Dutch for about half of a day. And what he did is put him on a cross like Jesus and pulled his skin apart with hot tongues. What? The Dutch report said that the guy did not utter a single word throughout the entire ordeal. And that is courage beyond belief. And pain, and taking off pain in an unbelievable way. And that was amazing. And that the Dutch report.
I'd read that before. And what I think in that moment when I had to visualize it, I said, this is our whole African spirituality. That brother spirit gone a long time. That was him buried there, but his spirit gone back home a long time. So they don't deal what they want to deal with. There was something else about another African, I don't remember the details, but it was in the Haitian Revolution, where I think they had killed somebody. And I think after they kill her, something happened whenever I make human sense. Like after they shoot her, it get up and move or something, and like people were convinced. Because again, they hold on to the African spirituality. They're like, you go carry the body, but you can't carry the spirit. They resist. Even when my children set off for the enslaver boats coming and say, I want to take water and go back home and for Koya and suffer to, I don't know
Yes.
what. So that enjoys that, like, the courage of we people and brother. How could we drop the baton? We have a duty to them, to us, the living, and our unborn children. Again, thank you so much, Brother Nigel.
Well said. Yeah.
Westmass
Thank you.
Guyanese
Thank you for having me.
activist.
Yeah. Thank you.
Only the people want to save the people.
This time me name is Papa. Believe me, come from